Before he'd fully exhaled, he yanked up the blanket to hide both Huacheng and his own body. Why has my lord descended? The hand under the blanket grasped Huacheng tightly, gesturing for him not to worry. Jun Wu leisurely poured 3 cups of tea before he rose to his feet. You did not return, so naturally I had to descend and see for myself what was keeping you. He folded his hands behind his back as he spoke, and slowly stepped out from the shadows to walk towards Jillian. Jillian's eyes traced up Jun Wu's white robes to land on the sword in his hand. Startled, he swiftly jumped off the bed. My lord, I can explain. Unexpectedly behind him, Huacheng pulled off the blanket and sat up. He wore a smile as he sat cross-legged with his arms casually resting on his knees. I don't think that's necessary, Huacheng said. Jillian stood between them. I think we can probably sit down and talk first. Look at this child, my lord. Doesn't he look like your son, correct? Jun Wu finished the statement for him and smiled. Jillian laughed awkwardly for a bit. How did my lord know what I was going to say? Jun Wu finally moved his gaze off of Huacheng. He lightly patted Jillian's shoulder and, without another word, turned to sit at the table once more. Jillian understood this meant there would be no confrontation for the time being. He sighed an unconscious breath of relief. If Jun Wu intended to kill, Jillian had personally witnessed just how terrifying he could be after he unsheathed his sword. Under no circumstances did Jillian want Huacheng to face that head-on. Illustration? Still, Huacheng's expression remained unfriendly, and his eyes never left Jun Wu. Jun Wu pushed the teacups forward. Good sir, although this is not the first time we have met, it certainly is the first time we have been in such close proximity. Since it is a peaceful occasion, why not take tea for wine and let us smooth over the situation? Jillian lightly cleared his throat and tried to appear as casual as possible as he donned his outer robe. Slipping on his boots, he asked, My lord, how are things in the upper court? Jun Wu didn't reply for a long moment. He set down his teacup and gazed out the window to watch the moon, then sighed. I do not wish to speak of it. All right, I won't ask, Jillian said. It would seem things were truly terrible. However, Jun Wu turned to look back and said, straight-faced, I kid. Even if I do not wish to speak of it, I must. Shinla, leave your little friend for now and follow me outside for a moment. Apparently there were things to discuss that shouldn't be overheard. Jillian was about to comply when Huacheng made a leisurely comment from behind him. Your upper court is in complete chaos. It's not a secret. Even rube ghosts out in the countryside know that the ghosts gathering couldn't be stopped at this time, and they're howling nonstop in excitement. So why bother speaking in private? He climbed off the bed and languidly strolled to the table, then picked up a teacup to idly toy with. He seemed quite uninterested in actually drinking from it. A few moments later, all 3 were seated at the table. Huacheng's current appearance looked young, but his expression and manners almost made one forget it. Nothing can deceive your eyes, good sir, Jun Wu replied evenly. The tea had been poured by Jun Wu, and due respect must be given, so Jillian sipped from his cup. As he did so, he asked, Isn't there still some time before Mount Tonglu's gates officially open and seal? Has it been confirmed that it's happening right now? Fengshen had told him this as well, but Jillian suspected he was exaggerating. He doubted this was as certain as he'd claimed. However, Jun Wu affirmed, Indeed, it cannot be stopped. I suppose you had planned on doing what you've always done. Deploy all the martial gods to blockade every road leading to Mount Tonglu and stop the ghosts en route, Huacheng commented. But then Muqing broke out of prison and went on the run. His whereabouts are unknown, and his absence leaves a gap in the southern defense. Did Fengshen return to the heavenly capital? Jillian inquired. How is he? Did he say anything? He returned, but not in good condition, Jun Wu replied. Nanyang came back wounded and gave a rushed report of the situation, then pleaded for me to order all heavenly officials not to touch the female ghost Nanchong and her son. He had wanted to descend again after reporting in, but his injuries were severe. He can barely move his right arm. I detained him to recover in the heavenly capital. However, that leaves the southern defense full of holes. If this were any other matter, for example, if they needed someone to go kill a monster or steal spiritual pills or something, Jillian would volunteer in an instant. But one couldn't lead troops by charging ahead alone. One man might break through an army of millions, but there was no way he could defend against that army. Jillian had long since understood that leading people and armies wasn't his strength. Rather than forcing himself to step up, it would be best if someone more suited for the position was nominated. Thus, he wasn't quick to volunteer. Instead, he asked, Is there no other martial god who can take up the task? Other martial gods have their own domains and assignments to handle and can take on no more. Jun Wu replied. Pei from the palace of Mingguang might have once been available, but he has long since been exiled. As for Qiying, he is the same as you, a free spirit who prefers to charge around the world alone, doing as he wishes. His whereabouts are also currently unknown, and that child never answers spiritual communication. The head official of the Palace of Lingwen is also missing. There is a temporary chief, but while the other civil gods are certainly skilled in the arts, they are incapable when it comes to facilitating communication, making decisions, and coordinating management. In these past few days, he made it sound like the upper court was about to fall apart. Shilian couldn't bear to hear, and his sympathy only grew. I remember my lord once said there is another remedy to this. Even if the gathering of ghosts can't be stopped, what can be done? Remedy, Hua Cheng echoed. Probably a suicidal one, I bet. Jun Wu gave him a look and sighed. I also said that I did not want to take that step unless absolutely necessary. It clicked in Shilian's mind. Could it be? Correct. With things as they are, the only way to remedy the situation is to send a martial god to infiltrate the gathering of ghosts at Mount Tonglu, Jun Wu slowly confirmed. If the slaughtering couldn't be stopped, then they had to ensure it was thorough. That not a single ghost was left behind. Shilian crossed his arms into his sleeves and knitted his brows. I'm not too familiar with Mount Tonglu, and I don't really know how the rules work. How should this be done? Exterminate every last nefarious creature that reaches the mountain? But that was an inconceivable task. A god would have to conceal their identity to infiltrate Mount Tonglu, and they couldn't bring much help along. Otherwise, the ghosts would discover that there were heavenly officials in their midst, and would surely surround and annihilate them. Mount Tonglu was also a locus of great evil. A heavenly official spiritual power would be severely restrictable in its perimeter. It would be even worse than the suppression they experienced at the Blackwater Demon Lair. No, Jun Wu replied. There is no need to make that much effort. I am familiar with Mount Tonglu. Look outside, Hua Cheng said. Following where he was pointing, Shilian looked out the window. There was a large field outside planted with some flowers and herbs, and there was also a tiny flower pot tucked into a corner. Hua Cheng hopped onto the windowsill and pointed at the flower pot. In the heart of Mount Tonglu lies a giant kiln. Just as the words left his lips, the little flower pot fell over and rolled to the center of the field, then righted itself. The once flat ground pulsed outward in waves from the flower pot heart, and the field was transformed into an expanse of rolling mounds of various sizes. Mount Tonglu, the central volcano, is fully encircled by mountains, Hua Cheng continued. These are the Tonglu Mountains, an area as big as 7 cities. Shilian watched, amazed, then leapt lightly out the window. As he stood in the field among the tiny hills, it made him feel like a giant looking down upon the vast earth. The slaughter begins at the outer edges of the mountain range, Hua Cheng continued. The goal is to reach the center and enter the mountain's heart. That is, the kiln. With a casual wave of his hand, many small things on the ground started to move. Shilian crouched for a closer look and discovered that dozens of weeds and leaves were twisting through the hills, as if they were tiny people crossing a mountain range. Which is to say, the ghosts are stronger as one approaches the center. As they close in on the kiln, he remarked. Yes, Hua Cheng said, because the weak weeds were already annihilated at the edges. With another light wave, a breeze rushed by. The weeds were completely cleared away. The empty little hills became desolate, appearing almost sad. However, the flower pot at the center suddenly emitted flashes of red light, looking very much the part of a tiny kiln, reddened by flame. As Shilian stared at it, he noticed a tiny red flower among the unremarkable weeds that had jumped onto the flower pot. They all spun around the edges of the pot like people dancing, and the little red flower danced the wildest. Hua Cheng crouched next to him. Only a handful of ghosts at most can enter the kiln's interior. Once they've done so, the kiln will close. Those little people danced and danced, then fell from the flower pot's rim one by one to swiftly be swallowed by the black soil. One ghost must break out of the kiln within 49 days of entering, Hua Cheng continued. The flower pot shuddered violently. Then a flash of blinding red light exploded from the pot with a bang, sending out a shockwave of dust. The little red flower leaped out of the mud, fresh from its earth-shattering rebirth. It raised its 2 tiny leaves skyward, as if shouting to the winds and announcing its might to the world. Shilian couldn't help but puff out a laugh at the sight. However, perhaps it had gotten overly excited. The little red flower slipped and nearly fell from its perch on the edge of the flower pot. Shilian hurriedly reached out and gently caught it, and he cradled it in his palms. The little red flower seemed dizzy from the fall. It shook its head, then raised its face to gaze at its rescuer. Shilian brushed off some specks of dirt that had splattered onto his hair. So, this little one born from Mount Tonglu is the next generation's ghost king, Hua Cheng nodded. Correct. The initial slaughter is a strengthening process. It cannot be skipped. If a ghost isn't strong enough and can't break out of the kiln after it enters, it will be suffocated inside and burned to ash. It will become nothing but fuel for a more qualified candidate. He rose to his feet and called to Jun Wu, who was still sitting inside. Your plan is to cut down the mighty and leave the weeds. There are only so many with the potential to become a ghost king. Once those candidates are annihilated, the remaining weak ones might get into the kiln, but they won't have the strength to leave. If they can't break out, they won't be recognized as ghost kings. Shilian nodded. Sounds doable. But will it work? Has it been attempted before? Jun Wu approached the window. I do not know. And no, it has never been attempted before. In the past, the ghosts have always been stopped before they managed to assemble. Hua Cheng crossed his arms. I am afraid it's impossible. Fighting under these conditions is suicide in all but name. I suggest the one who came up with such a brilliant idea go do it himself. I intend to, Jun Wu replied easily. Shilian was taken aback. My lord? Shinla, this is precisely why I descended, Jun Wu said. I will be going to Mount Tonglu. I need you to return to the upper court and take up my duties for the time being. Shilian dropped his hands and leapt to his feet. There's no way! Temporarily take your place? Me? My lord, please don't joke. No one will listen to me. Jun Wu grinned. Then this will be a very good chance for you to convince them to do so. Shilian rubbed his forehead. My lord, pardon me, but I really cannot agree with you this time. This is too absurd. To use a vulgar example from the mortal realm, an emperor can ride forth onto the battlefield, but have you ever heard of an emperor infiltrating and assassinating? The heavenly capital can soar so high in the heavens because you are the one who hope to hold it up. No other heavenly official can do that. It is through my lord's power alone. The sky will not fall if you are there to support it. But if you aren't there, it will. Shinla, the sky will not collapse for anyone in this world, Jun Wu replied, folding his hands behind him. Once you become accustomed to the way the world works, you will understand that life goes on, even without those lost along the road. There will always be new to replace the old. If a new ghost king is born, and they are another Crimson Rain-sought flower or ship-sinking Blackwater, there will not be an issue. But if they are another white-clothed calamity, the world will fall into chaos. He looked Shilian in the eyes. You have witnessed for yourself how difficult it is to kill a supreme like him. If I do not go, there is no other way. Shilian knew that Jun Wu wasn't being humble, managing to accurately identify and subdue the strongest among millions of ghosts while trapped in a weakened state and sealed off from any hope of outside aid. Shilian couldn't say with any certainty that he could manage to do it himself. Jun Wu alone had a real chance at success, but he might be away for a decade. What about the outside world? What about the upper court? Just then, Hua Cheng spoke up. Who says there's no other way? Illustration. And that is chapter 76.